Volodymyr Zelenskyy expected to be at the White House any minute now, ahead of both bilateral and multilateral engagements on ending a 3.5-year-long war with Russia. The meeting comes just 6 months after Zelenskyy's disastrous meeting at the White House, which descended into a heated exchange in the Oval Office in front of the glare of the world's cameras. To preview then, or talk further about what we're expecting to see, let's bring back into the conversation SABC US correspondent Sherwin Bryce-P. Still watching movements, Sherwin, and we have, haven't we, in the last few minutes, begun to see at least the European leaders arrive at the White House. Where do we stand in terms of the program for today?
Certainly correct. All the European leaders are in the White House, so it does sort of speak to the prestige that is being afforded Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. If I give you a bit of the side eye, Tebekile, it's just I'm watching my monitor here in studio, and I can tell you that there is an honor guard outside of the portico of the White House, under which Zelensky's car will appear in the next few minutes, the next 15 minutes, one imagines. Donald Trump, we expect, the President of the United States, will come out and welcome him. A different welcoming than the European leaders received. They were received by a White House official. But the main focus here, is the Zelenskyy show and how that will play out in the next hour here. We understand that they will go straight into a bilateral that is expected to be pool-fed, taken live for our benefit, essentially, those curious to watch how that plays out. And then very much later, about 9 p.m. South African time, that bilateral becomes a multilateral meeting where all the European leaders are going to be partaking. And two very key issues here, right? The extent to which Ukraine will accept a Russian proposal in terms of ceding territory, and, of course, a U.S. Proposal in terms of being a backstop in terms of security guarantees. The problem, though, in terms of that bargaining chip that the Russians and the U.S. have presented to the Ukrainians here, is that Zelenskyy himself does not have the authority to cede Ukrainian territory. In terms of the Ukrainian constitution, any change to the borders or the territory of Ukraine would need to go to a referendum that would have to be that all Ukrainians would partake in. So even that move in terms of the bargaining chips here that will be at play in terms of territorial concessions would need to go to a referendum if in fact the president agrees that that is the direction in which they want to move. What the Europeans have emphasized here is that they're very concerned about a backstop to any peace deal. In terms of security guarantees for Ukraine, which the Europeans would partake in. And then, of course, you have the broader perspective from the United Nations and international fora of that nature in terms of upholding international law, in terms of any future agreement, understanding that the UN Charter remains sacrosanct here in terms of territorial integrity, Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. Just moments ago, the UN spokesperson to the Secretary General said they were concerned about the deadly attacks that were continuing in places like Kherson and Zaporizhia. We understand that some 10 people were killed in strikes by the Russians earlier today. And then again affirming that any future deal needed to be within the prescripts of international law and the UN Charter. So a complicated is an underestimation about how things might go today.
And it's interesting, Sherwin, isn't it, that in the language post the meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin in Alaska on Friday, we've gone from discussing a ceasefire to, as you were just referencing, a peace deal. And in that is the worry on the part of Kyiv that ultimately there may have been conversations related to the carving up of its territory and given to Russia without them getting equal voice at the table.
The complication, I think the difference in the dispositions that you're seeing from the United States and the Russians on one end and the Europeans and Ukraine on the other is this difference about the need for a ceasefire. What the Ukrainians are arguing is that we need a ceasefire before we can go to substantive issues. We need our people to stop dying. We need the bombs to stop being fired and missiles across our heads while we discuss the substantive issues. There's disagreement on that from the Russians. They believe they are making gains territorially territorially, be that incremental as it might be in terms of the military, their special military operation in Ukraine. They have been edging, in terms of taking territory in Luhansk and in those Donetsk regions. The Ukrainians want that to stop while they talk about the substantive issues, right? Are we going to cede territory here? What does that look like? What does the backstop look like from the United States? And so there's this disagreement about peace deal first, as opposed to a ceasefire. Even the United Nations Secretary General has been unequivocal about the need for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire as a prerequisite to the broader issue of a peace deal. And so that in itself is a sticking point. We seem to have moved beyond a ceasefire here. And I'm just looking to my left. Zelenskyy has still not arrived. But yeah, these are some of the complications. And then, of course, you have this public display, right, in the Oval Office, as we saw in February. It didn't go very well. We have our own version of that in terms of President Ramaphosa's visit to the White House in May. And so we wonder how, just in terms of the optics, the choreography in front of the world media, how that will play. We do understand that after he arrives, he'll sign a guest book at the White House, and then they are going to go straight into a bilateral, which we expect to be public. But, things often change on a dime here at the White House. But certainly lots to look forward to this afternoon here in the United States.
And Sharon, as we watch this, I mean, the Russians, from what we're hearing post the Alaska meeting, for instance, would want to, and they have expressed this before, to hold on to territory that they've seized since invading Ukraine in 2022. Crimea has come up again. Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Kyiv is not too keen on that idea, is he? But what would be in it for Kyiv? Because the latest reports that we're getting is that about 10 people were killed in attacks, including in areas such as Zaporizhia. So what concessions is Moscow going to make? Is it just a silencing of the guns from their end?
Well, this is what the Russians are saying. They will freeze the front lines. They want Donetsk, and then they will essentially... the United States would then agree, they've agreed to a collective security, akin to Article 5 of the NATO Charter in terms of providing collective defense were Russia to invade Ukraine again. And in fact, part of this agreement that Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, has been floating is that the Russians would then make this a legislative in the Russian Duma. It would become law in Russia that essentially they would not attack Ukraine. So all these are some of the permutations that one imagines will be on the table today. But to the question of territory, right? This is a sacrosanct element of the UN Charter. A country's sovereignty, a country's territorial integrity, the notion that you cannot take another country's territory by force is essentially a very central tenet of international law. If a new precedent is made here in terms of ceding territory that was taken illegally in violation of international law, in violation of an ICJ judgment which was passed in March 2022. What then does that mean for future conflicts if this precedent is set? What does it mean for Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, for example, right, which the Russians are against in many ways? And so these are complicated issues in terms of the precedent it would set. It would be in violation, certainly, of international law. It would be in violation of a very clear judgment that was handed down by the ICJ in March 2022. And what does that portend? What does that mean for future agreements? There are territorial disputes currently between the RSF and the Sudan Armed Forces in that civil war. In fact, you had the RSF pronounce themselves as a parallel government. Everything is connected in international law. If you can do it, why can't I?
Sharon Bryce-Pease, on that point, in fact, Sharon, I think it's a good point at which we can let you go for now. We'll come back to you in the next few minutes. We're expecting the arrival of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House. As we wait for that to happen, let's show you those pictures once again. A live shot of the White House. There you go. The world's media is currently gathered to see how this meeting will go. Will it be a different tone to when Trump and Zelenskyy had that awkward exchange in the Oval Office? This is also significant because it'll be their first face-to-face meeting on U.S. soil after that tense exchange. The two men did meet, you might recall, on the sidelines of Pope Francis' funeral a few months ago in Rome. Let's bring in Oscar van Heerden now to make sense of what's been going on here. International relations expert with the University of Johannesburg. Dr. van Heerden, good to have you, as always, on the SABC. Interesting that just hours before this meeting happened, we got confirmation from the South African government that, in fact, President Ramaphosa has himself received a briefing, an update from President Putin of Russia on the meeting last week with President Trump. Does that mean that there's still a role for Pretoria and other African countries to play in brokering peace?
Well, good evening, Tembekile. Indeed, in fact, President Putin has made that abundantly clear, stating that he's updating President Ramaphosa not only to keep some of the BRICS alliance leaders informed, but also because he still sees very much an appreciation for the intervention from the African president's delegation for working towards peace. And for that reason, he is still very much keeping President Ramaphosa in the loop.
And how influential do you think South Africa is currently in this situation, given the rather complex relationship with the White House at the moment?
Well, if we have to look at the role players in this conflict, in as much as President Trump has now taken the initiative and finally decided to meet with President Putin in Alaska, the truth of the matter is, if you believe in the narrative, which I do, that this has been a proxy war for the Americans and for the Europeans using Ukraine against Russia, then it means that none of the European leaders, none of the American leaders, including President Trump, can claim to be honest brokers. And so it's either you are talking of the involvement of Turkey, which usually plays a role in these matters, or Qatar. And of course, I think that President Putin is also trying to say, or South Africa, because of the intervention that also took place with the African delegation. Remember, the phone call from Putin is not only about BRICS leaders, it's also to try and send a very clear message to Trump and to the European leaders that Russia is not isolated. It has alliances, it has partners and allies in the world.
And as we watch these pictures from the White House, Dr. van Heerden, perhaps to our viewers, let's take those full screen for you, because what we noticed a few moments ago was the raising of the flags, which would suggest that the arrival of President Zelenskyy is imminent. And when that does happen, Dr. van Heerden, I might have to pause you so we can observe the welcome that Donald Trump, we expect, will then give to Zelenskyy once the motorcade has arrived. But you were talking, for instance, about BRICS and Trump, I'm paraphrasing here, perhaps showing that Russia is not as isolated as long-standing US policy and European policy would want it to be, which leads me to my next question. Does Vladimir Putin have a friend, an ally in Donald Trump?
I think that he does. I think that what happened in Alaska is two seasoned leaders, rational actors. I think that Putin took the opportunity to inform both, not only President Trump, but also those that are close to him, Hegseth, Rubio, and so on, to say these are the facts on the ground. Because, you know, Tembekile, we can talk as much as we want with regards to what is going to be the outcome, what are the counter demands and so forth, the exuberance and arrogance of President Zelenskyy and so on. But at the end of the day, in these matters, unfortunately, the only thing that matters is battlefield realities. What is happening on the battlefield? And so when people talk of a ceasefire, for example, instead of a peace agreement, a long-lasting peace agreement, we have to ask the question,
Dr. van Heerden,
can you enforce a ceasefire?
If I can stop you there, I just want to go back to these pictures. Let's go back to the White House because we're seeing a black SUV arriving. Let's go back and see. I suspect this will be Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the president of Ukraine. I think it is because there's Donald Trump, the US president, standing at the entrance to the White House, ready to receive Zelenskyy. Let's pause and have a look and wait for the handshake, which is traditional. There we go. You're looking at pictures of the US President Donald Trump welcoming, hopefully we'll get those pictures in focus, but that's Donald Trump welcoming Volodymyr Zelenskyy back to the White House. We can't hear what he's saying. It's a pity we don't have audio on this feed, but there we go. The two men have now gone inside the White House. Volodymyr Zelenskyy welcomed by the US President Donald Trump in Washington, I think for the second time this year, hoping for a much calmer, friendlier interaction this time. When you recall that the last time he went to the White House, he was berated, that's Zelenskyy, even for his appearance, questioning why he wasn't in a suit. Trump's people also there. In fact, Trump himself saying to Zelenskyy at the time that you don't have the cards, suggesting that Russia basically had the cards in the war that has been going on since Moscow invaded its neighbor in 2022. We'll go back to our correspondent, Sharon Bryce-Pease, in a moment, but I want to bring back into the conversation Dr. Oscar van Heerden from the University of Johannesburg. So now they've gone in, Dr. van Heerden, there you have it. I wonder if the presence of the EU delegation, the Europeans in the room, is perhaps the only guarantee of good behavior this time around.
Well, for starters, I see that I couldn't make out precisely because we were a bit far, but it seems Zelenskyy is at least wearing something akin to a Mao Zedong outfit, which could be construed as some form of a suit. Of course, not a tie, but I think that would probably be acceptable for Trump and company. No, I mean, I think that from what I understand, President Trump is first going to have a one-on-one with President Zelenskyy before sitting down with all the other European leaders. But indeed, we certainly hope that that bilateral face-to-face is not going to go off the rails as we saw last February. I do think that because of that showdown in February, I think President Zelenskyy is going to be a little bit more circumspect. He knows that Trump can be unpredictable. This is not the time to try and pick a fight again or come across too arrogantly, because it's just going to irritate Trump, and he might change his mind in terms of whatever was in his mind in the first place. So I think he's going to be very cautious in the way he interacts with the president, be very complimentary, as was the case with President Putin. Mm-hmm. We know that flattery gets you quite far with Trump. But I do think that at the end of the day, as I was saying prior to his arrival, this insistence on a ceasefire, which I suspect is going to be the mantra of the European leaders and Zelenskyy. They are going to insist that they want a ceasefire. The question, I think that Trump needs to throw it back at them. Okay, you want a ceasefire, how are you going to ensure a ceasefire? Mm-hmm. Even if I'm with you, even if I stand with you as Trump, because we have already thrown everything, even if we don't want to admit it, we've thrown everything at Putin. Tanks, jets, long-range missiles, billions of dollars, and still they are advancing on the battlefield. So when you insist on this ceasefire as the only way forward, how do you think we are going to manage that?
All
because
right,
if you talk of
Dr.
additional sanctions...
Apologies to stop you once again. We're now inside the Oval Office. We're expecting there'll be some conversation. I'm hoping we can actually hear it this time. Trump and Zelenskyy sitting next to one another. Let's listen. Apologies, for some reason we don't seem to have audio, which defeats the purpose, I suppose, of trying to follow such a visit, because this is when we'll be expecting to hear what these two men are going to say to one another. Donald Trump speaking. I'm hoping we'll be able to sort this out and get you a feed where we actually are able to listen. Do we have that?
Just a short while ago with the president of Russia, and I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it, and today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe, and we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting. And thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank
Please.
you for invitation, and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, abducted children, and my wife, she, First Lady of Ukraine, she gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want it.
Yeah. So we are saying this sensitive topic, yes, please. And thanks to our partners, and that you supported this format, that after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO, I mean all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks to them, and thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump.
Do you think it's fair?
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelenskyy, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelenskyy of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
Well, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed, and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelenskyy here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards?
Well, I don't want to say that. I'm just here to be, look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
And to that point, President Zelenskyy, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners. And we will do our best for this. So, and I think we will show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war. And we are ready for Trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about Trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President,
yes. If the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
Well, we're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long-term. This is very long-term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine. And we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that out in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help when it comes to security. There's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe, but we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved.
Mr. President, Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it, and they'll be talking about it for a long time. But they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan. We're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear, as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
President, special envoy put forward.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Yeah, well, we're going to be meeting with a great representative group and 7 very powerful, very big countries and great people, all friends of mine and friends of yours. And we're going to have some suggestions made. They want to see peace. They would like to see peace.
President Trump, when did Russia, you said last night that...
In the red.
President Trump, do you think it's fair to, for Ukraine and for Russia to achieve a lasting and durable peace if Ukraine cedes its territories that Russia hasn't yet conquered? Do you think it's a fair peace for Ukraine?
We're going to have a lasting peace. Just to answer the first part of your question, we're going to have a lasting peace. I hope it's going to be immediately. I hope it doesn't have to go on. And I think people of the whole world is going to be very happy when that's announced.
Mr. President, you posted on social media, Mr. President, a very touching letter from the First Lady. And the letter was hand-delivered to President Putin. And it calls for an end to the war, essentially, because of the children and the children's future. Why did the First Lady feel that letter was necessary? Was it because she believes that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in the war? Is a similar letter being hand-delivered to President Zelenskyy?
So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children, and she hates to see something like this happening. And that goes for other wars too. I mean, she sees the heartbreak, the parents, the funerals that you see on television. Always funerals. We want to see something other than funerals. No, she felt. It was a beautiful letter. It was very well received by him. And she did ask me to say, she would love to see this end. She would love to see it end. And she says it very openly, very proudly, and with great sorrow because so many people have been killed.
Mr. President, last week,
Brian, go ahead, Brian.
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you.
Yes.
First of all, Mr. President Zelenskyy, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good.
I said to the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelenskyy.
In the same suit. You see, I changed you.
Maybe yours is much better. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances. And a little bit, we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, maybe, how to say, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, in the sea, yeah, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, No more elections. Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake
You like
news
this
is.
idea?
Yeah. Speaking of news, I got a question for you. This sounds insane for me even to ask this, but do you think the American media really doesn't even want a peace deal because they've seen they've been so critical of you every step of the way as you lead the charge for peace?
It's an amazing phenomenon. I said that if in the settlement you got Moscow, St. Petersburg, and thousands of miles around them, they would say I made a bad deal. The level of hatred and animosity is incredible. Not with all. I mean, we have great people up here. We also have terrible people up there that I think are told what to say. But, you know, in solving all of these wars, they don't even write about it. You know, I saw major wars. I saw wars that have been going on for 31, 35, and 37, and a couple of quicker ones. One that was going to go into a full-blown deal very quickly. You know what the one I'm talking about. It was a big one. But they don't even write about that. No matter what I do, no matter what, and you know, this is not anything to do with you. It's probably to your advantage in a certain way. But no matter what I do, no matter what deal I make, from my standpoint, you'll come out good. Maybe President Putin will come out good. But they'll say, Trump was absolutely horrible. It's just that, and I've lived with that for a long time. I've lived with it since just before the first election. I used to get great publicity. Now I get the worst publicity anyone's ever gotten in office, but I won in a landslide, so the people understand. They're the only ones that count, ultimately. But I've also had great reporters. I've had journalists that are very good. But it's very sad when you do the right thing. As an example, they said, because of the fact that Vladimir Putin came to American soil, this was a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump. No, it was really wonderful that he did it. It was a hard thing for him to do, to be honest with you. It was the opposite of what they said, but they said it. Now, if he didn't come, they'd say that was also bad for Trump. You know, there's no way. And there's just a great dishonesty of the press, and I think that's why it's lost its credibility. You know, its credibility is at an all-time low. We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe place anywhere to a place that now friends are calling me up, Democrats are calling me up, and they're saying, sir, I want to thank you. My wife and I went out to dinner last night for the first time in 4 years, and Washington, D.C. is safe, and you did that in 4 days. I'll tell you, it's safe. I had another friend of mine, he has a son who's a great golfer, he's on tour, and he came in fourth yesterday in the big tournament where Scotty Scheffler made the great shot, and he said his son is going to dinner in Washington, D.C. tonight. I said, would you have allowed that to happen a year ago? He said, no way, no way. He said, what you've done is incredible. And I think the people realize it. But the press says, he's a dictator, he's trying to take over. No, all I want is security for our people. But people that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner. And the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
Sir, I walked around yesterday with MTG. If you can walk around with DC with MTG and not be attacked, the city is safe.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace, and you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept, you know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
President Zelenskyy, can you explain the decision to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees, but stop short of pushing for their full membership?
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. And the people that are waiting for us, they are, I think they're very like-minded. They want to help out also.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President Trump.
Are you disappointed there's no ceasefire, President?
The United States has already given hundreds of billions of dollars to this war effort in Ukraine. At best, it is a stalemate, and the killing continues. So, President Trump, how much more is the United States willing to give Ukraine? And President Zelenskyy, how much more do you want?
Well, I'll start off just by saying we're not giving anything now. We're selling weapons. This is something before, I guess the number is well over $300 billion. That was under Joe Biden, a corrupt politician, not a smart man, never was. By the way, go back 40 years, he was not a smart man 40 years ago either, but now he's in particular bad. This was done by a corrupt administration that shouldn't have been in, and frankly, if the right results of the election were given, if I were president, this war would have never taken place, and he would have been very happy because he would have liked to have seen. I mean, they went through hell. He went through hell. This war would have never happened, and the people that were killed, a couple of million people, a lot of people with soldiers and everything else, and the people that have been displaced and forced into other areas and other countries because of what's happened, none of that would have happened. And I'm just saying that he was a horrible president, whether it was the borders or this. He was just a horrible, corrupt president.
Mr. President,
you want to
I can. Thanks so much. So first of all, we have possibility now to buy weapon from the United States. We are thankful for this program and this opportunity. We are thankful for Europe. They pay for this, and through NATO program, for example, Pearl and etc. We have some programs where we can have some money to finance this, and this is a part. I think it's not a part for the war and to defend us. It also will be a part for security guarantees, to strengthen our army, to rearm Ukrainian army. This is very, very important. And it depends how much money we need to rearm. For example, the question of air defense, we spoke about it with President Trump, and I'm happy that we have now bilateral decisions and we work on it with production, American production. Nobody in Europe has so many air defense like Patriots, for example. We need it very much, and this is also about defending.
I think the good news, we make the best military equipment in the world by far. You mentioned the Patriots. How good are they?
Systems.
We have systems, they're literally 100% foolproof. And it's really like shooting two bullets, two bullets hitting each other in the air in a space like this. The chances, 100%. It's 99 to 100%. So we sell the equipment to NATO. And NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment. Under Biden, it was just crazy what was going on. I believe the number is over 300. I think it could be $350 billion worth of equipment and money and everything else. And we've made more progress in settling this war in the last 2 months than they made in 4 years. This should have been settled a long time ago, but it should have never happened. Yeah, please.
Real quickly, you pushed out on social media.
All right, Brian, go first.
You pushed out on social media about doing away with mail-in ballots and potentially electronic voting machines. Can you expand on that and how important
Well, that's a very off-topic, just really quickly. Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. We're going to start with an executive order that's being written right now by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots because they're corrupt and Do you know that we're the only country in the world, I believe, I may be wrong, but just about the only country in the world that uses them because of what's happened, massive fraud all over the place. The other thing we want changed are the machines. For all of the money they spend, it's approximately 10 times more expensive than paper ballots. And paper ballots are very sophisticated with the watermark paper and everything else. We would get secure elections. We'd get much faster results. The machines, I mean, they say we're going to have the results in 2 weeks. With paper ballots, you have the results that night. Most people, but most people, many countries use paper ballots. It's the most secure form. So between paper ballots, very, very important, paper ballots, and I think maybe even more important, the mail-in voting. We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud. If you have mail-in vote, even Jimmy Carter with this commission, they set it up. He said the one thing about mail-in voting, you will never have an honest election if you have mail-in. And it's time that the Republicans get tough and stop it, because the Democrats want it. It's the only way they can get elected. Because with men and women's sports and with transgender for everybody and open borders and all of the horrible things, and now the new thing is they love crime. They're fighting me on the fact that I've made Washington, D.C. safe. We're not going to get mugged, beaten up, or killed like all the people you've been watching get so badly hurt. I'm glad, I hate to take your time in this, but I'm glad you asked me that question. We're going to stop mail-in ballots because it's corrupt. You know, when you go to a voting booth and you do it the right way and you go to a state that runs it properly, you go in, they even ask me, they asked me for my license plate, for identity. I said, I don't know if I have it. They said, sir, you have to have it. I was very impressed, actually. But it's very hard to cheat with mail-in voting. As you know what happens in California, it's so corrupt, where some people get 5, 6, 7 ballots delivered to them. Now, we got to stop mail-in voting, and the Republicans have to lead the charge. The Democrats want it because they have horrible policy. If you have mail-in voting, you're not going to have many Democrats get elected. That's bigger than anything having to do with redistricting, believe me. And the Republicans have to get smart. We're not going to have a country. I said for a long time at rallies, you need borders and you need free and fair elections. Those two things, otherwise you don't have. We have strong borders now. In 90 days, Mr. President, we didn't have 0 in 3 months. Not one person came in illegally into our country. In fact, even I find that hard to believe, but it's run by a little bit of a liberal group that put out the numbers, so I guess it's, but 0, 0, and 0. You go back a year ago, 2 years ago, millions of people poured into our country. It was terrible. Thank you very much.
From President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. And really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and then people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on the big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
And Mr. President, are you going to commit American troops to that NATO-like protection in order to get President Zelenskyy to a deal today?
Well, I don't know if you define it that way, but NATO-like, I mean, we have people waiting in another room right now. They're all here from Europe, biggest people in Europe, and they want to give protection. They feel very strongly about it, and we'll help them out with that. I think it's very important. I think it's very important to get the deal done.
You've been involved with the peacekeeping in Ukraine since your first day in the administration. What would you say to the Ukrainian people right now who are suffering under the Russian attacks and hoping that the American people will stand with them?
Well, I know Ukrainian people. I've known many over the years. They're great people. They're smart. They're energetic. They love their country. I mean, they love their country, and we want to get this war ended. That's all I can do. I love the Ukrainian people, but I love all people. I love the Russian people. I love them all. I want to get the war stopped. Very important.
Mr. President, was there any aspect of your discussion with Vladimir Putin that left you disappointed?
Look, We just spoke to, I was just telling the president, I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
That's how we come to the end of the first media engagement between Donald Trump, the US president, currently hosting his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. It's gotten off to a much better start than their last face-to-face meeting in the Oval Office. Zelenskyy, by the way, in a suit. One of the things he was berated about during the last visit was the fact that he'd arrived in some sort of military-style uniform. Trump confident that a deal can be done. He likes the concept of a ceasefire, but he prefers a peace deal. He did make a concession, Professor or Dr. Oscar van Heerden, as we bring you back. Donald Trump making a concession that he thought that this would be an easy war to end between Russia and Ukraine. And he says in his own words, it's been a tough one, which is quite a departure from his election promise that he would be able to bring it to an end almost immediately. What can we read into that?
I think it's the telltale signs of a mature leader. You know, people have always spoken about Trump's arrogance, his air in the, his head in the sky and so on. But here you have a situation where for the first time in a very long time, President Trump is honest. He says that he thought that he could end this, and he genuinely did. But it's much more complicated. There's much more stakeholders involved, and it has proven difficult. And that's why he's more determined to try and stop it. I think, my takeaway from this press conference, as I indicated to you, Tembekile, I knew that Zelenskyy was going to be full of praise, lots of thank yous, support, thank you for supporting us, and so on. And in a way also speaking past the president. Because when he was asked the question about what is it that he wants and so forth, he talks of guarantees, he talks of more weapons, more money, and so forth. So in his mind, I think it's very clear that he wants to continue with this war. Mm-hmm. Whereas Donald Trump is saying there's no need for a ceasefire. I've stopped 6 other wars without talking about ceasefires. It can be done. The commitment must be there. Yes, if the Europeans want to provide security for Ukraine, we will obviously also be on the periphery. They are buying weapons. So he's repeating all the things that we already know. And also, if I dare say, pushing some of Putin's lines. The one around ceasefire, for example, out. He does want a peace agreement. He's talking about, he made the point very subtly that Putin has always indicated that he does not want Ukraine to be part of NATO. So in a way saying, I agree with that, because otherwise we're not going to be able to move forward. So it seems to me that Alaska, Putin convinced Trump that they are in control. They are in control of the battlefield. He's here out of courtesy. Of course, he wants peace. He's not interested in the rest of the Ukraine, but he's not going to give up the Oblast regions, and he's certainly not going to be discussing Crimea.
So is Trump closer then to Putin than he is to Zelenskyy and the Europeans at this point?
I think from what I can read, and I'm out on a limb here, Tembekile, I think Trump is basically saying to Zelenskyy and to the Europeans when he sees them, what is the alternative, guys? Insisting on fighting on, and you've been at it for, and he makes this point continuously, you have been at it for 4 years, it's 3.5 years, but almost 4 years. You have not been able to push Putin back. You have not been able to defend the regions and the countries. In fact, in the last few days, 2 weeks, Putin has moved the armed forces in certain parts of the region up to 11 kilometers. This is huge. It means that all over the Ukrainian forces are capitulating, it's falling apart. And if the Europeans are going to insist that they want to continue to fight, then Trump, I think, is going to say, okay, we are stepping back. You are going to take over this war.
Right.
And You need weapons, you can buy it from us.
I suppose the reverse of that is that when the invasion of Ukraine was launched by Moscow in 2022, the idea, the expectation, in fact, was that based on military might alone, they'd be able to basically overrun the areas, all the areas they wanted, overthrow, if that's what it took, the Zelensky government almost within days. Why has Russia not been successful in achieving its war goals in their entirety almost 4 years into it?
Yeah, firstly, Temekile, people are always spreading false narratives. The truth of the matter is that the Russian forces were outside Kyiv. They were ready to take over, but what happened is that there was also a process that happened in a peace process in Istanbul. Now they came to some agreement that they are going to agree to the terms of the Istanbul agreement. Putin then decides he's going to pull back his forces because there's an agreement. But then Boris Johnson appears on the scene, flies in from London, meets with Zelensky, and convinces Zelensky that he needs to ditch that Istanbul plan and that the Europeans will support him and defend him.
Mm-hmm.
And he agrees to that. And then the war starts. And the reason, just to conclude, Tembekile, the reason why the Russians have found it so difficult to actually overthrow the Kyiv regime is because they are not only, it's a false statement that Russia is fighting Ukraine. Russia is fighting the entire North Atlantic Treaty Organization with all its members. All those people that are in Washington have been actively in this war with Ukraine in terms of equipment, in terms of money, intelligence, logistics, and also specialized forces. They like to deny the fact that they don't have any boots on the ground, but some of the weapon systems are so sophisticated, there's no time to train the Ukrainians. They have British and Italian and French forces in the Ukraine fighting this war on behalf of Ukraine.
Right. And briefly, sir, if you can, in 30 seconds, you mentioned earlier that Zelensky appears willing to keep the war going, if you will. Trump has said they're not going to supply weapons or cash. They're selling, in fact, weapons at this stage, which the EU countries would buy on behalf of Ukraine, as has been done in the past, if I'm correct. Given that scenario, then, what can these EU leaders, which Trump appears to have a great deal of respect for, what can they do to twist his arm on some of these positions?
All that's going to happen, if that's the eventuality, they are just going to be prolonging the ultimate outcome. There can be, as Trump says, there can be a solution next week, and a peace agreement process can start. The killing can stop if there's agreement on some of the demands. However, if we go this route, then they are just going to postpone this very outcome for another year, maybe, because the Europeans don't have all the money that they claim they have to buy all these weapons, and America can't provide all the weapons that is needed, because we know that the production of the Patriot systems, etc., are months and months already in arrears. So, for example, the earliest they can get Patriot systems in any quantity to Ukraine is in 2027.
Right. Oscar van Heerden, you and I are getting in trouble. I'm being told we're well over our last 30 seconds. But for now, thank you so much for sticking with us. Dr. Oscar van Heerden from the University of Johannesburg, helping us to make sense of the start of a visit by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington tonight. Among the other people who are there are European leaders, including Emmanuel Macron of France, the UK's Keir Starmer as well in the room.